Here this evening. And this evening we're going to be looking at clearly things that are just not enough. Not enough had been given. If we will go to 2 Kings, this will be at the death of Elisha, just before Elisha the prophet dies. Of course, we're not talking about Elijah, who Elijah is taken up, but Elisha, he dies an old man. And we go to 2 Kings chapter 13, and we begin in verse 14. And this can seem like a rather confusing passage, but it's not. It's not confusing. It doesn't have to be that way. 2 Kings chapter 13, beginning in verse 14, Elisha had become sick with the illness of which he would die. So this is the very illness that would kill him. Then Joash, the king of Israel, came down to him and wept over his face and said, "Oh, my father, the chariots of Israel and their horsemen." That's what he's calling Elisha. And Elisha said to him, "Take a bow and some arrows." So he took himself a bow and some arrows. All right, so this has to do with that of Syria. And Syria is a problem that Joash has to deal with. And Syria is what is actually this demonstration, this thing that Elisha is telling him to do is going to be concerning defeating Syria. That's what this is going to be about. Take a bow and some arrows. So he took himself a bow and some arrows. Verse 16, then he said to the king of Israel, "Put your hand on the bow." So he put his hand on the bow, and Elisha put his hand on the king's hand, and he said, "Open the east window." And he opened it. Then Elisha said, "Shoot." And he shot. And he said, "The arrow of the Lord's deliverance and the arrow of deliverance from Syria, for you must strike the Syrians at Aphek till you have destroyed them." Okay? You must strike them till you have destroyed them. Here is the message of God's deliverance. But this is going to be dependent on what Joash does. Then he said, "Take the arrows." Take a handful of arrows. Just take the arrows. So he took them, and he said to the king of Israel, "Strike the ground." So he struck 3 times and stopped. Now, notice Elisha didn't tell him, strike the ground 3 times, or he didn't tell him how many times he should strike the ground. He didn't say once and you're done. He didn't say 3 times and you're done, or you've got to do this 7 times. He doesn't tell him. He says, strike the ground. And so Joash strikes the ground 3 times. Now, that's unfortunate. But the fact is that in the Hebrew, what he is told is to smite the ground, to devastate the ground. Take the arrows and smash the ground with it, as if you are going to destroy it. All right, that is the essence of that word strike, is you do your best against this. Now, he didn't tell him how many times he should do it. He just tells him the extent, that is, by way of the command of you destroy it. You smite this as hard as you can. He stopped at 3. And the man of God was angry with him and said, "You should have struck 5 or 6 times. Then you would have struck Syria till you had destroyed it. But now you will strike Syria only 3 times. That's it. It's going to take more than that to destroy Syria. It's going to take more than 3. And because of this, because of the actions of Joash, they're not going to be able to destroy Syria. Now, they're going to beat Syria, and they're going to beat Syria 3 times, but Syria still remains to this day. Now, if Joash had just smashed the ground 20 times, there would have been no response as far as, well, that wasn't enough. But he says with 3 times, it's not enough. You should have struck it more than that. You should have considered it, the words there more of striking this harder and more times. Now, here is the idea that while Joash will be successful to a certain point, after that he's not going to be successful anymore. That it's going to be three battles and that's it. And that's simply not enough. That's not enough. Let's now go to, just quickly, let's go to Luke chapter 14. Luke 14. And this concerns that of counting the cost and making sure. This is Jesus speaking concerning those who are going to be his disciples. Those who want to be his disciples must count the cost. Because living a Christian life, following Christ, is not just a party. It's not a pep rally. It has its moments of joy, yes. But it also has its moments of trial and tribulation and troubles and times of sorrow. And there are things that we are called to do. When Jesus says, take up your cross and follow me, a cross is a lethal thing. That is the persecutions. Accepting those persecutions, accepting what it takes to become a Christian. Picking up your cross, taking your cross and following me means that you are willing to count the cost. And you realize that whatever it costs, it's worth it. Whatever it costs. But we come to Luke chapter 14, beginning in verse 25. Now great multitudes went with him, and he turned and said to them, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. All right, that seems very strange to hear from him, that you are to hate father and mother. I thought he taught of honoring father and mother. That children, brothers, sister, yes, his own life also? What does that mean? It means, truly it means, does that mean we don't have to love our children? We don't have to love ourselves? We don't have to love our brothers or sisters? We don't have to love our father and mother, but in fact we are to hate them? No, that's not what it means. It means that we love God more. That's precisely what it means. That these things cannot get between us. No one is to get between us and God. Nobody. And that God comes first before anybody else. Verse 27, and whoever does not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. That's all part of it. There is a pain that's going to be associated with being a disciple. There is sorrow that's going to be associated and difficulties that are going to be there. And if they weren't difficult, then it couldn't be called a test. If the things handed to us were just ease, if it was just ease and luxury, that's not a test at all. But when there is emotional distress, when there is turmoil, when there is, and that would be emotional turmoil, when there's all these things, then we are under a test. And we come out having been tested, either passing or failing, either becoming stronger or weaker. Verse 28, for which of you intending to build a tower does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it? All right, now, today, we really don't build towers. Companies do, skyscrapers and all that. But we don't build towers today. But in the past, some would. If they had the money to do it, they might just do it. All right, then there would be a lot of things about having a tower that would, there would be a practical aspect, but there would also be another thing of everybody sees you have a tower. All right, everybody sees that you must be someone who's got some money behind you, some power behind you, because you have a tower. All right, so he says, who intends to build a tower and doesn't sit down and count the cost, whether you can finish or not? Who would do that? Lest after he has laid the foundation, he is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man begins to build and was not able to finish it. So it becomes a public thing. They can see what was attempted, but it wasn't finished. Well, what's he saying? That we must count the cost concerning living a life for Christ. That's what it comes down to. That you don't start this without counting the cost, but when you start, you continue on. And of course, everybody is to start. Everyone is to finish. That's what we're supposed to be doing. But you count the cost first in understanding that there will be hardships. There will be a cost to it. Here's the news: nothing's free. Live whatever life you want to, it's not free. That too has a cost, and it's a higher cost. What Christ, the life Christ gives, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. Okay, it's not it's a cost, but it's not impossible. It's not impossible. But you try to live outside of Christ, there's a price to that too. And that one is extremely high. But we go to verse 31. Or what king going to make war against another king does not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? Or else, while the other is still a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks conditions of peace. So likewise, whoever of you does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple. That's part of the cost. And notice this verse 33 goes right into what he's saying in verse 26. That father, mother, wife, children, brothers, sisters, all these things, we must be willing to forsake those if it's necessary. Forsake those for the sake of following Christ, for the sake of Him. And because that's going to be a price. That's a price that is going to be paid. It must be. Otherwise, you begin something and you cannot finish it. Going in the right direction and then, never mind. It doesn't go any further. Now let's discuss something just briefly in this. Let's go to Revelation chapter 13. Revelation 13. And we just want to read one verse, and it's verse 18. And this is gives so many people things to talk about and things to speculate. There really doesn't have to be so much speculation on this whatsoever. The beast. Notice, here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. So the beast is a man behaving like a beast. His number is 666. What does that mean? It's actually not difficult to understand what that means. Some want to make it into a literal name. Doesn't quite work. Matter of fact, I remember a fella, he was kind of looking at my name and trying to figure out if my first, middle, and last name would equal 666, and he was disappointed that it didn't. I don't know where he was getting to, but no. While Howard does have 6 letters, William does not, and my middle name is Seth, and so he was kind of disappointed that he couldn't make a joke or whatever he was going to do along with that. 666, what does that mean? It's very simple, and it all comes from an understanding of the Bible. Numbers can be used for meanings. Numbers in the Bible can be literal. It's literal 6 days. Okay. When the 7th day God rested. Those are literal numbers. You have Israel in the wilderness, 40 years. That's a literal number. It's not symbolic at all. But there are other numbers that are symbolic, and they have a symbolism to it. 7, the number 7, has the meaning of perfection, being perfect. And it is associated with God, and it's associated with Christ. In this book, you have the lamb that has 7 eyes and 7 horns. You have the lampstands around the throne. You've got 7 of those around the throne, which is the 7 spirits of God. It's all this idea of utter perfection. 7 means that. And to say that something that to describe God as holy, 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 truly would be saying God is 777. Truly perfect, perfect, perfect. To say that someone is 666 means imperfect, imperfect, imperfect. Unholy, unholy, unholy. This person is an utter failure, a complete disaster. Because while 7 means perfection, 6 means falling short. Didn't quite have enough to get there. 6 wasn't enough to get you across the finish line. 6 wasn't enough to make you a winner. 6 wasn't enough to keep you from failing. And that is in this idea of complete failure is what it comes down to with whoever this beast was. Now, this is a man. Then this would be a very powerful man. And we've seen people who have behaved like beasts to where, yeah, we can understand what that means. We can understand that someone can become incredibly powerful and they don't care about human life whatsoever. They just mass murder, and it's okay. Mass murder, and they don't seem to be bothered by it other than they can't murder fast enough. Here is this idea of just not getting where you're supposed to be, and that it is a failure. And once again, complete failure. Nothing about this person is good. Now, we go to Psalm 41. Just look at this very briefly. Just one verse, Psalm 41, and it is a prophecy, and it's a prophecy about an individual, and you may be well aware of the prophecy. You may know precisely right off the bat who's being discussed here. And while this is a Psalm of David, he's not talking about himself or anything that occurs to David. Verse 9, even my own familiar friend in whom who I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted up his heel against me. Now, if we didn't have the New Testament telling us precisely what that meant, we could argue as to over the meaning of that verse. That this was something that occurred with David, or this is poetic with someone David knew, or that, yeah, there happens to be similarities between this person and Judas, but it doesn't mean that. Well, yeah, it does. We know that because the New Testament tells us it does. That this links right to Judas. And Judas, I want you to understand, even my own familiar friend. Now, this is Jesus speaking here. This is one of those Psalms where it is very much as though Jesus has pinned this down to describe what is going on in his life. And we talked about this not too long ago with Psalm 69, going through that chapter, going through that psalm. Even my own familiar friend. Here is a friend of the Messiah who's going to do what? Now understand, that friend of the Messiah was chosen as an apostle. He's not considered a second-rate apostle or a second-rate disciple. He receives everything all the other apostles and disciples received. The same level of love, the same level of teaching, the same in miracles. Judas could perform miracles. Matthew chapter 10, he sent out with the other 11 to do that very thing. And it doesn't say, and everyone did it except Judas because he wasn't able to do it. They all did it. They all were performing miracles. And here is this man who is a friend of the Messiah, who is an apostle of the Christ, who is performing miracles. And notice, whom I trusted. He received the friendship of Christ. He received the trust of Christ. He received a lot from Christ. Who ate my bread has lifted up his heel against me. Here is someone showing they did not have enough. Enough what? Enough fortitude, enough of wanting to, just go back to that word fortitude, of ridding themselves of everything worldly, ridding themselves of wickedness, and seeing Christ as being the Son of God and having a love for our Creator. So what was the motive behind Judas? What was the motive? Well, I can only know of one. And we don't have to speculate. We don't have to do any kind of psychological evaluation on him. We don't have to do anything. Clearly, it was money. What else was he doing it for? Clearly, it was money, because he's gladly paid. He negotiates for what his payment is going to be. Obviously, it's money. That is his problem. And of course, he's a thief. While he's a friend of the Messiah, while he is trusted by the Messiah, he is also, he's an apostle, but he's also a thief. And there is a problem that he has, and he's turning out to not have enough to make it across that finish line. He doesn't have enough to where he can do the right thing when it comes down to it. He doesn't. Someone like Peter, he too fails on that night. Peter ends up denying Christ, but he returns back. He returns, seeing that what he did was wrong, but he returns back, and he returns back courageous. We see him where on the night of Christ being tried, he denies even knowing him. But it's not too much longer, and it's not too much longer, where we see him standing before the Sanhedrin court, and he says we ought to obey God rather than men. And that they are continuing to teach. While he denied him on one occasion, now he's preaching in his name. He's preaching in his name just right there in the power and in the hearing of the Sanhedrin court. He's doing it right there. That's someone who's showing they have counted the cost, and they can continue on. They can continue on. Now let's go to Matthew chapter 25. Matthew 25. And here we have a parable, and it's a parable of 10 people. You have these 10 virgins waiting for the bridegroom. And they all have to have lamps, and they all have to have oil, but some do not bring enough for the long haul, we might say. Some do not bring enough for the time that it's going to take. Because that's part of counting the cost, is understanding that this may not be quick. This may be a long wait. And what is being taught here is that while we may be prepared for something for a short period, for the short term, we may be prepared for that. We're not prepared for anything longer than that. We don't have the patience for anything longer than that. It's like an uncle of mine that told me, he said, he was really a nice man, and but he had his ways about him. And he said, I never really wanted to know too much about anything. I don't mind learning about something for a little bit, but I don't want to go very deep into it. I'll go until, that's all as much as I really need to know. He doesn't want to go any further. And he did say, and I paid the price for that. Okay? Now, here, this is different. It's similar, but it's a different sort of thing entirely, of being prepared for the short term, but not for anything beyond that. The kingdom of heaven, this is verse 1, so Matthew 25, verse 1, the kingdom of heaven shall be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Now 5 of them were wise and 5 were foolish. Those who were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them. But the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. Now while the bridegroom was delayed, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight a cry was heard, behold, the bridegroom is coming, go out to meet him. Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out. And this is something that can't be done. It's something that whatever we're going to call this oil, it can't be shared. You have to have your own. It can't be shared. But the wise answered, saying, no, lest there should not be enough for us and you, but go rather to those who sell and buy for yourselves. And while they went out, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding, and the door was shut. Afterwards, the other virgins came also, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. But he answered and said, assuredly I say to you, I do not know you. Watch. Here's the warning. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming. You don't know. I don't know. No one can know. But we must be prepared. We must be ready. And it's not enough to say, well, we did really well at one point in our lives. Well, what about now? What about now? It is for us to continue on and to increase, to continue on and become more mature, become more useful, become more skilled, and have a greater amount of fruit of the Spirit. A greater faith, a greater patience, a greater love, having all those things to a higher degree. And with that, we are able to take on more and more of the trials. Now, in looking through all of this, we have the parables. We have talked about Peter as being a good example, Judas as being a bad example. And starting off with that of Elisha and Joash, that Christ is calling us for this, the entire length of our life here. He's calling for us to be faithful to Him and to continue to be faithful to Him and to do the very things that He has called us to do, whether it's a good day or a bad day, whether it happens to be easy or whether it happens to be hard. He is calling for us to do these things and to have what it takes to count the cost and to understand that there is going to be a cost. Is it worth it? Yes, it is. It is worth it. As Paul made mention, that of what awaits is far greater than anything that we've had to sacrifice on this earth, far greater than anything that we've had to deal with on this earth, because this, as far as eternity is concerned, is just a flash in the pan, and it's done. Our life, just like a vapor, as James calls it, just a vapor. And then after that, it's not described as a vapor, is it? On this earth, yes, but after this, it's not described as a vapor. Our life is eternal after this. Our life is eternal. It does not end. And we choose where we're going to go. I tell you what, Satan, how he can sell what he sells, he's good at it. Because what he has to sell is nothing like what God gives. It's nothing. With him, it's enjoy your life. Oh, and you're going to die, yes, eventually, but that's down the line. That's down the line. But you're still going to die. It still comes to an end. And then what? Well, fact is that Satan is going to be in judgment just like us. Satan's going to be cast into hell with all of his angels and with all the wicked. And we can join them if we want to, or we can count the cost now, do what it takes now, and be with Christ. And we ask this evening, if you need to respond to the invitation, that you come as we stand and sing.